it's great to see so many, such a large turnout for this important topic. I am going to begin our conversation with a description of what provoked us to have this panel discussion. And I think, as you know, and what was stated in July.
Can you speak into the mic?
Well, okay. Is it on?
Yeah,
that's good
You'll
now.
have to speak directly. It's hard to reach.
I'll speak directly into this microphone. Okay. In July, the American Historical Association produced a statement, and I'll quote, strongly encouraging graduate programs and university libraries to adopt a policy that allows the embargoing of completed history PhD dissertations in digital form for as many as 6 years. And as you can imagine, that, oh, I thought we had guests coming from Amazon.
I did too. Ours was landing.
Okay, anyway, and you can imagine that that comment provoked a lot of discussion at Rutgers University libraries just in itself. And it was passed around, and there was a lot of commenting about what that meant. And the article that was in the college and research libraries, I'm going to read the abstract that was in there. That was a study to evaluate the impact of open access, ETDs, and embargoes. And it says, an increasing number of higher education institutions worldwide are requiring submissions of electronic theses and dissertations by graduate students and are subsequently providing open access to these works in online repositories. Faculty advisors and graduate students are concerned that such unfettered access to their work could diminish future publishing opportunities. This study investigated social sciences, arts, and humanities journal editors and university press directors' attitudes towards ETDs. The findings of this study indicate that manuscripts that are revisions of openly accessible ETDs are always welcomed for submission or considered on a case-by-case basis by 82.8% of journal editors and 53.7% of university press directors polled. So this will provoke a very good discussion on this issue. And we are very fortunate to have a diverse panel. And Rhonda Marker is the head of the Scholarly Communications Center and the RU Core Collection Manager. With regard to RU Core, the Rutgers University Institutional Repository, Rhonda oversees the RU ETD submission system, interfaces with the graduate schools with regard to general ETD policies and individual cases, and manages embargo requests. She meets regularly with the copyright and licensing librarian to review copyright and permissions issues related to RU Core and how best to manage them under U.S. copyright law and the university's copyright policy. She also is the person who is most likely to respond to the contact us queries from the RU Core and RU ETD web pages. And sitting next to Rhonda is Peter Mickulas. He has been an editor at 2 scholarly editing projects, the papers of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and the Thomas A. Edison papers. Prior to becoming the Social Sciences and History of Medicine editor at Rutgers University Press in 2010, he was employed by the New Jersey Department of State in Trenton, where he served as a program officer for a state grant program for cultural nonprofits. His first book, Britain's Botanical Empire, The New York Botanical Garden and American Botany, was published in 2007. His second, The Governors of New Jersey, forthcoming from Rutgers Press in 2014, was co-edited with Michael Berkner and Donald Lincoln. And sitting next to Peter is Kevin Mulcahy. Kevin has earned his PhD in English at Rutgers in 1982 and an MLIS at Rutgers in 1984. He has been a member of the Rutgers Library faculty since 1983 and is a humanities librarian. He's also a humanities providing reference and instruction and serving as collection development librarian for English and American literature and linguistics. He chairs the Library Resources Council and is collection development coordinator for the New Brunswick Libraries. His current research project is a citation analysis of dissertations by Rutgers English students and books by English department faculty. Next to Kevin is Alex Holzman, and he is the director of Temple University Press. An alumnus of Rutgers College, he has also worked at Ohio State and Cambridge University presses in both an editorial and sales capacity and in both books and journals. Alex was president of the Association of American University Presses in 2008. The next to Alex is Mike Diaz, and he's the executive director for marketing and strategic initiatives from ProQuest. Mike Diaz works with academic institutions to maximize the benefit of partnerships related to dissemination, digitization, and preservation of dissertations and theses, and academic video content. Prior to joining ProQuest, Mike worked as Director of International Marketing at Thomson Gale, and as an analyst at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where he helped U.S. IT and aerospace companies to expand internationally. Mike holds an MA from American University and a BA from the University of Vermont. He is a frequent presenter at information industry conferences, and his Twitter feed, @NHDiaz, explores developments in academic publishing and the implications of emerging trends in higher education, academic libraries, and technologies. And last but certainly not least is Ashley Falzetti. And Ashley is completing her PhD in Women and Gender Studies. She is interested in how we move forward given the long histories of violence and systemic oppression that shape the worlds we inhabit. So, her dissertation focuses on the social impact of the stories of Frances Slocum, the most popular historical figure of the Miami Nation of Indians of Indiana, even though she was born to a white Quaker family in Rhode Island. Okay, should really be a wonderful discussion, and we're going to start with Rhonda.
Thank you, Grace Mary. Okay. Having sat through sessions in this room, I know that I have to actually speak directly into this mic. If I don't, somebody in the back just kind of go like this to remind me that I have to pay attention to that. As head of the Scholarly Communication Center, I also want to welcome you to our space. If you haven't been in a session in the lecture hall, I hope you're comfortable. We really enjoy having you here, and we also appreciate the support that we get from the libraries for this magnificent space. So welcome, everybody. Okay, I have a PowerPoint for you because if I don't, then no one else will get time to speak. And this way I can discipline my remarks. And so that, I'm not trying to be formal, it's just you'll be thankful for it. So I'm going to talk about open access, embargoes, and RUETD. Okay, the first thing I have here is a quote that gives a definition of open access, and I'm not trying to define it for you, but I find this particular definition helpful because it explains how librarians bring our values to the discussions about open access. And there are certain things that librarians do in the course of trying to help students, researchers, faculty find information that betray a certain value that we share. First of all, by open access, I want to highlight that it's meant, in my mind, when I talk about it, that it's free. Okay, There are other definitions of open that don't necessarily involve free, but I'm assuming it's free. Immediate access, and we're talking specifically about the public internet. That's open access. And the key concept for me is that scholars are giving to the world. There is a little bit of an altruistic notion embedded in the idea of open access. And the idea also is that any user, it's indiscriminate, can use the works that are provided by open access. And I've also highlighted the term full text, meaning the full content of what has been created. And I've also highlighted that what we strive for is doing this all within a legal context. We are not trying to abridge anybody's rights or do anything unlawful, that there are certain constraints on us. So I'm just throwing that out there. Now you know where I'm coming from. We do have an institutional repository at Rutgers University. It's called RU Core. And we have some goals of this repository. First of all, we archive important scholarly works and make them openly available to the university, to the world. Part of our archive is that we are committed to permanently preserving the digital files. And right now we are preserving text, still images, moving images, audio, and research data. And we make those digital files freely available. When authors contribute to the repository, they give us a non-exclusive right, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that. And our overriding purpose in doing this is to increase the impact of that research. Okay, narrowing down just a little bit, one of the components of RU Core is the University Electronic Theses and Dissertations, the RU ETD. And for those of you who might be looking forward to contributing to RU ETD, this is a little guideway for how that happens. First of all, you need to know that the thesis creation and the defense are completed prior to any involvement with RU ETD. That's all done offline. And that is really the content part. And then the student/author submits that completed thesis or dissertation through an RU ETD application, online application. As part of that online process, the graduate school reviews the submission, and what they're looking at mostly is for form. Make sure you have your bibliography included, because if it was in a separate file from the body of your text and you forgot, anyway, you know what I mean. Once the graduate school has approved the ETD and the student has graduated, then the ETD is sent to RU Core, the repository. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about author rights with regard to ETDs. We recognize that the dissertation is protected by copyright by virtue of its being in a tangible form. It is automatically, so to speak, copyrighted. Now, there is a process called copyright registration with the U.S. Copyright Office that does give additional legal protections. I'm not going to answer any questions about that. You can Google U.S. Copyright Office registration, and they'll tell you all about it. Rutgers University also has a copyright policy that posits that the thesis or dissertation author holds the copyright. So, and I have a link there to the copyright policy, the Rutgers University copyright policy. Now, the author grants some rights to RU Core. So let's take a look at those rights. And they grant us these rights. The right to archive it, and that's how we preserve it. We preserve an archival copy of the ETD. they allow us to reproduce it. We create a service copy because, as you know, every time you retrieve a digital file, something can happen to it. Okay? So that archival copy is not touched. A copy of it is what is touched and is available for download. Also, we do things like we take the first page and we make a little thumbnail because it's reassuring to the searchers if they see a little representation of what the thing is. So that's reproducing, okay? We're reproducing that first page. And they give us the right to distribute it and make it accessible over the internet. Okay. We don't take any copyright. We claim no copyright whatsoever. These are the only rights we take. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The other part of my title is embargo. So an embargo is a temporary restriction of access to a digital file. Why might someone want to embargo something? Well, these are the major reasons, and let me tell you, one of the things that I could do all night long is tell you all the interesting stories about all of the really, really trivial reasons why people want to embargo, but I won't do that. Number one, by far, is that the author plans to publish a book or article based on the thesis or dissertation. And publisher policies vary widely, as I'm sure you will hear from some of our other speakers, but many publishers have a requirement that the dissertation version not be freely accessible when they publish the book or article. Another purpose is if information in the dissertation, especially theses or dissertation, cannot be made public because a patent application is in the works. That's a requirement that you can't make this publicly available while the patent is being reviewed. To tell you the truth, in our experience, this is not often cited as a reason for the embargo. Rutgers University is very aggressive about the patent process, and by the time the dissertation is submitted, that process has been well underway. So that actually ends up being a really minor thing for us. Another one is privacy concerns. This is not often cited as a reason for embargo, but it is significant. And I'd like to remind students that they need to be careful about making private disclosures and putting personally identifiable information in their thesis or dissertation, just as you would with anything that is going to be on public record. RUETD offers the author to secure an embargo option. When they first submit it, they can ask for immediate access, or they can ask for a 6-month embargo, 1 year, or 2 years. And sometimes the author doesn't realize that they will need an embargo until after the graduation. And so we do take requests for those through the RU Core Contact Us link or through the graduate school, and whichever way it comes in, we confer with each other, and we make sure that the student is appropriately protected. But many authors choose not to embargo. One of the reasons is because they want to promote greater access to their research. They want to show impact for their dissertation. They want to demonstrate the scholarly value of their dissertation. We do have students every semester, especially in the spring, say, when is that going to be available? Because I've applied for an assistant professorship, and I want to put the link in my cover letter or something like that. It is included in Google Scholar along with peer-reviewed journal articles. RU Core displays usage statistics, and so they can cite that. And sometimes you can signal interest to a potential publisher by showing that, in the first 3 months, people were, 100 people downloaded my dissertation. So this is a really hot topic, and you might be interested in publishing a book based on this. And I always want to tell the authors, however, be careful about predatory publishers who will say, oh, fine, give us a PDF and we'll publish it. So, yeah. So I think we're doing questions at the end.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the other speakers.
Kevin's going next? Yeah, I think so. Good evening. And if I wander too far from the mic, let me know. I'm here, I think, maybe speaking a little bit more informally. I'm someone with a foot in two camps. I'm a librarian with an interest in providing as complete access as possible to research. I want everyone to have access. But I'm also someone who completed a humanities dissertation 32 years ago. So I'm both a librarian who values open access and a sometimes scholar who recognizes the pressure facing newly minted PhDs, a brutal job market that has persisted, by my experience, for over 30 years, and probably goes further back than that. And even if you survive the winnowing process, then you have the tenure process to get through. I'm also, though, a sometimes scholar who greatly values the possibility of reaching and engaging readers in different ways. I'm going to tell a possibly silly story about my own dissertation. I'm hoping it'll make a point. I was training a reference assistant at our reference desk quite a few years ago and showing the person how to search WorldCat, the major database of, the closest thing we have to a universal bibliography yet, I suppose. And I thought, for some reason, whether it was the context or just being silly, I used my own dissertation as a sample search. I said, let's search my dissertation and we'll see if it's out there. And I was absurdly gratified to discover that copies were owned by a library in Japan and a library in Germany. And then I rechecked this morning and discovered that an additional copy was held in Australia. Now I'm very happy to be a scholar with an international reputation. My dissertation available on 4 continents. I've only got 2 to go if we don't count Antarctica. The reality, of course, is much more mundane. There's 5 copies total. They're simply scattered widely in the world. The foreign copies, I suspect, simply reflect the unavailability of the dissertation at that time through PDF. Nowadays, somebody would go to maybe university microforms or to the RU Core and just get a PDF. At that point, it wasn't possible. Also, it reflects that dissertations and books generally don't travel from continent to continent by interlibrary loan. So doubtless some student thought, maybe that looks interesting, and got her library to buy a copy on microfilm. But even knowing that, and even knowing that it's entirely possible that readers glance at the first chapter and then tossed it aside and discussed, it still gives me a touch of happiness to know that it's out there on 4 continents. Why? I guess even silly as it is, it gets at something at the heart of scholarship. Some people here have written dissertations or have written books. It's a very lonely process. You basically sit sometimes in a study, sometimes in a coffee shop, wherever you happen to be. Nowadays at a computer, when I was doing it at an electric typewriter. And you spend that time reading, thinking, writing. It's a very obsessive process. My dissertation took 4 years, and that's not unusual in the humanities. Most of us who write dissertations or books spend part of that time questioning our own sanity for doing so. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this to ourselves, shutting ourselves away like that? And what keeps us going, aside from caffeine and other stimulants, and perhaps the help of friends and family, is the faint hope that scholarship itself is somehow intrinsically important, that we have something to contribute to the long-standing discourse of our own particular field, that some reader or some reader somewhere will find our contribution informative, useful, challenging, provocative, that it might even upset their worldview and contribute to their own scholarship. I certainly understand the plight of new PhDs. Will an open access dissertation lessen your chances of getting a book accepted, getting a job, getting tenure? But I guess I want to add something to the calculation that author has to make. The possibility of getting her ideas out there, of making some difference. And I don't think any of us go into academe for the prospect of becoming rich. If we do, we are quickly disabused of that. What we hope for is to make some kind of an impact. So I think the writer of a dissertation faces something of a dilemma. On the one hand, there's the desire to get your ideas out there so that other people can respond to them, that it might advance their scholarship, change their way of thinking, enlighten someone, maybe even in some cases change our political situation. But you also have to deal with the realities of, can I get a job that will allow me to support my scholarship on an ongoing basis? I know lots of people, when I buy books for the library and I look at the author notes, sometimes they're identified as independent scholar, which means they're utterly, absolutely qualified PhDs who have not yet found a job and do this somehow on their own. So I guess one of the things I would say is I would hope that authors of dissertations, when they're offering their dissertations to a publisher, let the publisher know your plans to deepen, to broaden, to expand, to improve that dissertation. That this dissertation is, a taste of what's coming, but it's not everything. So that the publisher will know it's the promise of something better. And maybe that will give you the chance to allow open access to it. And if that's not possible, think about shortening any kind of embargo that you put on it as much as possible. Not everyone will have the money to buy your book when it gets published, or will have access to an academic library where it's available, especially given the globalization of our world, of our academic world. Give people a chance to get at it. And I think that's a real value that all of us who are scholars or even occasionally dabble in scholarship will hope for. It puts us in a context of a larger kind of problem, though, and that is something that I think Peter and Alex will talk about a bit. The pressures faced by publishers who add a tremendous value to the kind of research that we do. And they and libraries are all facing enormous pressures. We have a context right now where all of us are engaged in kind of an uphill battle against the overall funding of universities and research in the world. Open access is an attempt to get past that, but there are complicating factors. Someone has to pay for the publication process, for the editing process, for the process of archiving. And we do not as yet have a model for doing that effectively. But I hope that we can look for some kind of a collaborative model that respects all the different partners in this enterprise, but provides as much access as possible, as quickly as possible, as conveniently as possible for the largest number of people. Because that is the ideal that should drive all of us involved in scholarship and research, whether doing it or supporting it in whatever way. So, thank you.
Thanks. It's difficult to disagree with anything that's been said. I should say, I'll introduce myself, Peter Mickulas. I'm an acquiring editor just down the block at Rutgers University Press. And I'm here mainly in some ways as a pair of listening ears for my boss, the director of the press, who couldn't join us. And in that spirit, I also have a set of bullet points to which I must stick. As you can see, I'm not a policymaker, and I'll be interested to hear what Alex, who is at a sister press down in Philadelphia, will have to say. And what I can share with you is, from my perspective as an acquiring editor, what this embargo debate looks like. And as some of you know, I talked about this with a workshop at the press earlier today, and part of that workshop had to do with essentially giving some advice to the same junior scholars that we were talking about. And I used my particularly favorite agricultural or metaphor, which is to husband your work and be a curator of that work in the context that we are dealing with inevitably. And I am all for, and Alex will back me up, and Marley, my boss, is all for the dissemination of scholarship and everything that we've talked about so far. So it's sometimes easy maybe to put the publishers as an easily not accountable straw person. However, operating in the context of something that Kevin alluded to towards the end there, and that is the declining library budgeteer, the budgets that you have to purchase books and so on. And so, just to prove to you that I'm not some retrograde Luddite, I have my notes here on my iPhone. So here's one of the things, here's the first thing I thought I would share with you, just a bit of evidence here. This is the text, I won't tell you who it's to, of a letter I wrote to one of my recently signed authors who's writing a very interesting book. I won't say exactly what it's on yet. Dear X, since you are currently under contract with Rutgers University Press for your first book, which will be based in part upon your dissertation, I'm writing you to request that you remove your dissertation from the University of Illinois repository. She knew this was coming, by the way. We talked about this. And this was used as a tool for her to introduce the topic to her own degree-granting university institution, to your counterpart there, I suppose. It has become increasingly common in today's publishing climate for nonprofit university presses such as Rutgers and Temple to ask that its authors embargo, at least temporarily, their dissertations from institutional repositories at their degree-granting institutions. Although your first book will, of course, be the result of a substantial revision of this dissertation, it nevertheless will rely in part on your earlier research for your degree. Having a free electronic copy of that earlier version of the work available online or via interlibrary loan has the inevitable potential of reducing possible sales, lots of qualifiers there, of the book to both individual and institutional buyers. In recognition of these dynamics, most research universities and their libraries regularly grant these requests to remove dissertations from institutional repositories when an author has secured a contract with an academic publisher. Please request that the university remove it from its online repository for a period of 2 years in this instance. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll answer any questions. And so that's sort of how we're handling it down the block at Rutgers Press. And that is, based upon our experience, based upon, the network of other sister presses and the AAUP, the other AAUP, the University Press Trade Group. And I know briefly from talking with Alex prior to this meeting that he took an informal survey that he'll tell you about. I'm very eager to hear what he has to say, of other university press people in the community, and got quite an overwhelming response. And one of the things that he shared with me, at least initially, is that there are policies in name only. They're sort of ad hoc, and so it's a catch-as-catch-can basis right now. But I'm just here to stress, on the behest of my director, the context in which we're operating. And we're very much dependent upon, as a not-for-profit publisher, as an arm of the university, just like our sister institution here, the library is, upon university support, budgetary support, to underwrite our salaries, all of the things that we do to, as Kevin said, add value to the heavily revised dissertation that becomes a book, and of course other books as well. And without that institutional support, or with dwindling in terms of real dollars and absolute dollars, institutional support, and that is unfortunately what has happened, we are left to sort of deal with the inevitable market influences that will crop up. So there's two strands here, right? So if I'm giving the workshop earlier today, talking to younger scholars about what they should do to deal with their work and use it wisely, I'm going to say that the AHA statement that you began with was, I think, created such a storm that was really unnecessary. And what the AHA, I think, was calling for is just the young author to have the option. Okay, we're all for the dissemination of scholarship, we're all for the sharing, the community of knowledge, and so forth. But the young scholar operates in a context of having to get a job, having to get tenure, having to get promotion. And so their resource that they have to bargain with is their own intellectual work. So that's one possibility. The other thing I can just point out is that in following up and doing a little reading in anticipation of coming here and listening to my co-panelists tell you much more than I can, I came across a lot of times, as we all know, you'll find some incredible wisdom in the comments of blog posts and so forth, right? And lo and behold, I actually found the author that I read to you, the letter that I read to you earlier today. She had a blog post. And she is heavily active in the digital humanities at a major research university. And yet she at the same time in this blog post took issue with the AHA, questioned its motives, questioned how it made the scholarly society appear. And that was one of the comments, I think, that was really leveled at the Historical Association, was that this is such a retrograde move. How can you do this? This is not recognizing the new digital reality. Certainly is not in the best interest of scholarship, and so on. And yet, at the same time, my author embargoed the dissertation from peer reviews. Now, it was so again. There's consistency is what's the old phrase? It's the hobgoblin of little minds. I think that's Emerson. And so we're all operating in a context. And then I'll just, in closing, I'm going to quote somebody else, and this is another comment, not from my author, but from someone else, who actually rose to the gallant defense of the AHA. And that is that PhDs on the market for their first job and their first publishing contract are a disenfranchised group, period. The reality is that open access endangers their academic viability. Now, I'm not endorsing any of these statements, I'm just throwing this out here for the discussion. And inevitably, I'm interested in hearing what you all have to say as well. I began investigating and agitating on this specific topic as far back as 2008 when it came to my attention as a PhD candidate. I gathered names of editors and library administrators willing to go on the record about realities of their financial inability to publish and purchase books based largely on openly accessible dissertations. I think open access has a fabulous realm of current and potential uses and purposes, yet requiring open access of academic works is a luxury for those with jobs with tenure without the need of tenure or fields not book-based. Newly minted PhDs in history often do not fall into any of these categories. I'm a supporter and practitioner of the field of digital humanities, and I'm a digital media author. I'm not a Luddite, I'm a realist. The reality is books are needed for tenure in history, and it's not reasonable to expect those with so much at stake without job security to shoulder a burden that does not show signs of industry-wide change in the near future. And that's another issue too, of course, and I think that's the other thing. It's clearly, and I used this metaphor earlier today in our workshop, we're part of an ecosystem, and that is, if like it or not, university press, editors, and editorial boards play a key role in the tenure process. We all know that. And until that changes as well, the system, this is going to require a lot more change, I think, to become ironed out and be a little smoother. So the answers, I don't have the answers, and I'm willing to take your questions back to people who have better answers, or at least can tell me what to say. But thank you very much for the time.
Before I start, I'm a little curious about the audience. How many of you would identify yourself as librarians or library students? Most. Okay. How many people are graduate students or assistant faculty? Okay. And how many people are publishers? Okay. So
You're the exit.
You missed someone here because you didn't ask about tenured faculty at the library.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. Thanks. So that actually helps because I think it requires a little explanation of some of the background of where publishers are coming from. But I want to say up front that I came a little late to this. When this whole controversy first broke, I knew what we did at Temple, which has been largely to continue to publish dissertations, but with a wary eye to make sure we really thought there was something there beyond the average, because we're all trying to be better than, we're all like Wobegon. We want to be just a little bit better than the average, and we want people to have a reason to buy it. And then I was asked to be on this panel, and I thought I'd better do a little work, and so I started reading some of the posts that came after the AHA was the AHA statement was issued, and some of the comments. And then I did sort of seemed like a natural thing to do. We have listservs in the Association of American University Presses for basically every part of the press operation. So I posted to the general list and also to the directors of presses and asked people, what's your policy? What have you been doing? And is what you're doing the result of a conscious decision to have a policy, or is it a result of inertia? And I'll get to the results of that in a minute, but I want to say my overall impression is that this is a subject that has generated a whole lot more heat than it has light. There's a real lot of passionate statements, both on the listservs that I polled and certainly in the online conversation about this stuff. But in fact, there isn't a whole lot of hard data about what the effect of making dissertations available, open access, online, either through ProQuest or through an institutional repository or some other way. What is the effect actually on sales? There's been a whole lot of hearsay over the years. When publishers get together, they'll whisper that, libraries just aren't buying revised dissertations anymore. This was way before institutional repositories, way before open access. I'm just saying, so you would disguise, and one of the responses I got back said, we tell the author to erase all evidence of this being a dissertation from any part of the book. So all the front matter is scrubbed. You can't thank your advisor. You can thank somebody. You can't say, no, thanks for being on my committee or anything like that. Hide it as much as you can. Since most of you are librarians, you will know that libraries buy primarily by way of approval plans. Certainly research institutions do. When I talked to, I also asked a friend who works at Yankee Book Peddler, which is one of the largest wholesalers of books to libraries. And I had known for a long time that there is a box that you tick when you're creating the metadata, and they have book profilers whose job is to go through every book that they receive and put as much information as they can about it into the metadata in addition to whatever the publisher may have supplied. And there's a box that asks revised dissertation. And he said, in his experience, and he'd be the closest to hard data because he has the sales figures, one of the things that isn't necessarily recognized completely is that university presses rarely sell books directly to libraries, that they're sold through things like Yankee Book Peddler and several other vendors, and we don't find out who has bought the book and for what, and whether in fact the dissertation thing was a deciding factor. He says he doesn't see, he'd like to do more analysis, but he doesn't see any evidence of any big switch. That it doesn't really depress sales. To which my question was, well, then why do you ask the question? Why is that box there? If librarians don't care that a book is a revised dissertation, then why don't they want to know whether a book is a revised dissertation? And I'd love to hear answers from people when we get to the Q&A, because I don't have the answer to that. I had a couple of press directors say, we have seen when we publish revised dissertations, they sell 20 to 40% less than others. The thing is, as I said, all of this predates institutional repositories and the ability to put things on open access. And on the face of it, if it is as easy, and I had one respondent who indicated it's perhaps not so easy, if it is as easy as saying, I post my dissertation when it's accepted, and when the publisher is ready to publish the book, I ask my institution to take it down for X number of years. And I'm not sure what period I would ask for, at least 3, I suppose. But to take it down for a number of years, in part because I would think any scholar would want their audience to be reading the most refined, polished version of their work and their research that they could. If there were other things associated with a dissertation like data sets and things like that, then fine, leave them up, it's fine with me. But why would you want to send people interested in your work back to your raw dissertation if you've got a better version? You know, it's like saying, why don't you read my first draft instead of my finished novel? There's a disconnect there. So if we can do that, then I don't see why that's not the basis for everybody sort of agreeing, okay, that's the standard. Doesn't change the question of whether or not it depresses sales. And you might ask, well, what does it really matter if it depresses sales? And I had somebody who responded by saying, library sales as a whole have diminished so much that I really doubt it matters one way or the other if a particular book is based on a dissertation that is openly available online. Because essentially, there was a time when libraries accounted for way over half the sales of university press monographs. Today, it's below 25%, and going south fast. That would be fine if we had other markets that were replacing it, but we don't. And university presses, and this is different from libraries, and especially for the students in the room, you know, this may seem like, well, why are you people fighting over all of this? University presses, like libraries, have squeezed budgets. So the level of support we're receiving from our home institution is shrinking, even though university presses in this country were founded specifically to disseminate work of high scholarship but low commercial value, or insufficient commercial value to interest a commercial press. At the same time, we're charged with recovering, for most presses, somewhere in the neighborhood of 80, sometimes as high as 90% of our costs. Libraries don't have to recover their costs. They spend their budgets. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, it's just different. So if we spend money and nobody, this is another one of those great unknowns. You would think the question, what does it cost to publish a monograph? Or what does it cost to publish a revised dissertation? Would have a relatively easy answer, but it doesn't, because it's very hard to figure out how much time is an editor putting into a book on average? How much does the peer review process cost? How much of the cost of electricity and telephones and office units and every other overhead do you assign to a particular book? Do you assign more to books that you know you're publishing for a bigger commercial audience, or do you just spread that, you know, on average across a whole book? Most people seem to agree it's $20,000 or $25,000 or in that range. I know one person, Joe Esposito, who is also a Rutgers person, thinks it's $50,000 a book. You know, and I know people who think it's less. But the reason that presses care about this is that if we undertake all of that effort, and if we spend $20,000 to $25,000 to work with a scholar to get her manuscript into the best possible shape it can be in, and then we go market it too, which is something I haven't talked about, and marketing is dissemination. We were talking a little bit at dinner about how people discover a dissertation in an institutional repository, which I raised up in a provocative way that Mike can talk about that. Said, well, why do you need ProQuest, you know? And we got onto Google Scholar, and there was sort of, well, have you ever tried to find anything on Google Scholar? Well, have you ever tried to find a monograph? I mean, how do you ever learn about these things? You find them at exhibits, at conferences. You see ads in the journals that you read. You see ads in other places, maybe in the Chronicle of Higher Education. You get direct email lists. All of that is roughly another 20% cost. So if we don't recover those costs, then we really have a problem. There are other issues. I'm starting to go a little long, I think, but there are other issues as well. And again, they go beyond this, but I think they really fit in here in terms of just when we do sell the monograph back to a library, what is it they're buying? And if they buy the electronic book, what are their rights to that electronic book? And if the electronic book is available to an unlimited number of simultaneous users, that's great. And the technology lets us do that. And I firmly believe that any solution to any of these problems that fights the technology is inherently wrong, which is why I would ultimately disagree with the AHA, because I think, you know, you need to find ways to let technology flower and let you continue to exist. And so if we can reach, a larger percentage of the world's population than we're reaching, then that's a great thing. What are there, 7 billion people on the planet, and university press monographs and hardcover and electronic these days might sell 400 copies. It's a pretty low percentage of the world that we're reaching. So I don't want to fight technology. Bottom line is that having done all this survey, I got people who said, we think the revised dissertation is so different that it won't affect the market, and so we don't factor that into our considerations. We get people who say, we absolutely will not take a revised dissertation now. I saw, and there were people who said, disguise it as best you can. I do sort of love it. It's one of those silly sort of things. One person said, as I think I read the person who said that, well, sales are so bad we do it anyway. Another person said, I realize library sales are minimal, but given that we're facing death by 1,000 cuts, anything that generates a sale is preferable to anything that doesn't. So they're taking a hard line, and they're really trying to tell their authors, no, you cannot put your dissertation into this repository. What it all adds up to, and I could read more of these. I actually thought about just reading the responses, because some of them are very funny, but I thought it would be too incoherent, which it may be anyway. But the bottom line is, if so much as one university press says we won't consider a revised dissertation, or in one case, one said, well, we'll consider it, but the editor has to explain that to the editorial board when they bring it to the editorial board to be approved. And I think probably most people in the room know that university presses, usually the imprint of a university press is not controlled by the people who work at the press, it's controlled by tenured faculty at the university. So university presses are actually, to a certain degree, in a way, committees of the faculty senate or committees of the faculty. And so, the faculty themselves will sometimes say, oh, well, it's a revised dissertation, it's already available, why do you want to publish it? So all of that comes in. In the end, there is no disputing the fact that the venues for those of you who are students to place your dissertations is smaller in the presence of the online dissertation than it would be without. What is also impossible to say is how much. My guess is a little, but not a lot, but if it's your manuscript that doesn't get published because of this, and there are whole fields now where it's virtually impossible to get a revised dissertation published without finding some sort of support money from somewhere, then you guys are the ones who get hurt while we sort of debate the niceties of this, which is why I think it's incumbent for libraries and presses and commercial presses to work together to find a solution. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm going to echo some of the comments that came before me, but what I'm going to plan to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the AHA, talk a little bit about some of the research that we've done in terms of embargo requests to ProQuest, and then I'll close with some background on embargoes and how ProQuest handles embargoes. So first of all, I did want to say that at ProQuest we share the concern that that it's difficult for newly minted history PhDs to get out into the market and to be successful with their work and to obtain tenure, and definitely I think that is a challenging situation. I'm going to agree that it's really a situation that needs to be tackled by a collaborative effort among the whole community. Decisions related to dissertation dissemination are inherently complex and also inherently personal. I do think that it's important to get as much counsel as you can, as many recommendations as you can from knowledgeable people. And that it's also important to weigh some of the benefits of broad dissemination while you're looking at some of the risks associated with prior publication. I think, being a good steward for your own work and getting good advice is really important for every doctoral student. Our experience has been that each publisher and each editorial board sets its own policy. There are widely varying policies in terms of how embargo requests are handled, or if they're presented. ProQuest has been publishing dissertations since the late 1930s. We're still seeing that most publishers are not finding the prior publication of a dissertation or thesis problematic. But again, if it's your manuscript, right, there's not the overall numbers and the averages are less important. For authors that are concerned with prior publication, ProQuest has a number of mechanisms that we make available to help alleviate that concern. We have a range of dissemination options to meet authors' needs, either for really broad or more narrow dissemination. And there's also the possibility to request an embargo if you have a publishing contract that's pending. We think that a collaborative effort is needed to gather data and to gain a deeper understanding of the challenges that are faced by emerging scholars, not just in history, but in a wide range of disciplines. We want to make sure that authors can start their careers on the right track. So in terms of the research that we've done on embargo requests, we looked at around a decade of submissions focused on around 500,000 records. We saw around 5% of the records had some type of embargo. Of course, some might be level of access, some might be delays in terms of time. And this spanned across more than 900 institutions. Some of those embargoes were pretty short-term embargoes. Others ranged as high as 5 years. So, we are seeing, a wide range of different types of embargoes. And there certainly are disciplinary differences that we see, particularly in art and drama and a number of like disciplines. There tend to be a lot more challenges in this area. So those are my observations, and happy to be involved in this conversation.
So my name is Ashley Falzetti, and I get to be the lowly graduate student tonight. And so I'm finishing my dissertation, and so I'm very much thinking about these issues and what I'm going to do. And I gotta be honest, most of my friends who have already finished their dissertation and are working on getting a job or already have a tenure track job, they have no idea what open access dissertation means. They had no idea what an embargo means. They filled out the form and they have no idea what we're talking about tonight. And so I think that when we talk about these percentages of embargoes, it assumes that the people making these decisions are making an active choice, an informed choice. And I think that that's not a fair assumption for us to make, for one thing. And then among the friends I have who we are having these conversations, I think I'm kind of lucky because I've gotten to go to a bunch of publishing workshops. In fact, I think I went to one with you before, maybe up there, maybe you had it. But I've gotten to go to a bunch of these, and so I got to hear university press acquisition editors telling us you need to think about embargoing your dissertation. If you want to if you want to publish your book at a university press, you need to do everything you can to embargo your dissertation for as long as you can. And so this is a message I've received repeatedly over the last 2 years. And for me and my friends who are talking about this, the embargo is really not the thing that we care about. Like, we're not really invested in embargoing our dissertation. We're more interested in issues of access. And so when a dissertation is made completely open access online, it means you can go and you can Google it and it can pop up. You have a PDF and it's searchable. You can copy and paste large chunks of that right into a nice final paper for your class, right? And so we don't know how this material is being used. And a lot of my friends who have their dissertations completely available online now, they didn't know it was available, and they had no idea that it was going to be published in this kind of format. You know, they didn't even know it existed out there. And some of them are very unhappy with their dissertations, and they're very embarrassed it's out there. So these are the kind of issues that I'm thinking about. In reading about all the hubbub having to do with the AHA statement, I was surprised at how a lot of the conversations turned to issues about royalties and kind of representing these young scholars who are embargoing their dissertations as kind of selfish and not willing to share their research with the world. It's like, what's wrong with them? Why are they doing research if they don't want to share it with the world? And that's not the kind of conversation I hear anyone having. In fact, the concern has to do partly with jobs and publishing issues, of course. I don't think that needs to be explained anymore. And also with ethical concerns about publication. I'm in women's and gender studies, so a lot of my friends do highly political research. They might do work on militant groups that are, their whereabouts or inner workings of their groups could be pretty precarious information. Some of them have the government overseeing what goes into their books, and so to have their dissertations just published without the kind of further revisions or thinking about how that work's going to go out into the world is problematic. The dissertation committees are primarily just, especially in the humanities, are concerned with whether we've shown that we're able to complete research, carry out the project, and whether we've done enough of it to kind of say that we're done. But a lot of people, what counts as their dissertation isn't imagined as a final product. It's imagined as, well, oftentimes it can be like, what, you got a tenure track job? Let's see what we can throw together to get you out the door, right? But when we talk about what the final product is gonna be, we talk about the book. The book is the final product. We're constantly told, remember the dissertation is not the book, right? The dissertation is for an audience of 3 people, and your book is gonna be for an audience of hundreds. And so my concerns personally have a lot to do with these editorial issues, about who the audience is, how it's being accessed. And I feel my concern is that it counts as a publication in all the wrong ways and none of the right ways. So it counts as a publication, like for instance, I believe this is right. I promise this is to the best of my knowledge correct. Signs is a feminist journal here at Rutgers, an academic press journal. And so they will not publish any article that has any prior publications. And they consider online publication, open access dissertations, a prior publication. So if my dissertation is made available open access, I am no longer able to publish any version of that in Signs. And that's part of their process. And I've talked to the editor of Signs about this, and she's made it clear that they consider open access dissertations a previous publication.
That's a University of Chicago press.
Yeah, University of Chicago Press. And so that's their policy. So they have to abide by that policy. Thank you. And so I lost my train of thought a little bit. I don't have my stuff organized. And so I'm concerned about these kinds of issues in publishing, and also about how it's accessed. One of my questions I have for you guys is, when I have requested dissertations, because I'm doing research and I see someone wrote on this a couple of years ago, I've requested that dissertation through the library system, and then I've received it on microfilm, right? And that requires me to actually read the text and process it and quote it in that format, instead of being able to like search a PDF and kind of grab bits and pieces of not well edited material, just for that single content. And so my concern is we don't have a choice in how we interact with these repositories. As Rhonda mentioned earlier, she said that that the student authors give rights to RU Core in replicating stuff, but we're actually not given a choice in participating in that process. We're required to participate in that process. So all dissertations at New Brunswick have to go into the repository and have to be given to ProQuest. And so we don't have any choice in that. Our only choice becomes the embargo. And so the reason why grad students are concerned with the embargo is because it's the only blunt tool we have in this messy process where there's no other choices available. And so rather than squabbling over like 6 months or 1 month or 2 year embargoes, my question would be could we think of other ways of making this material accessible so that it doesn't count as a previous publication and it's not fully searchable online, but it's still available through the library system. If it was up to me, I would make my dissertation instantly available to the library, but not open access online. And right now, it doesn't seem to be there even a conversation in the policies about that, from what I can tell. So, thank you.
Well, you certainly have provided us with the type of...
Rosemary,
I'm going to...
being taped because you can't be heard.
Oh.
Yes.
I'm doing...
You need to use a microphone.
I
Is there
know.
handheld anywhere?
No, but does this come off?
It does.
We can get a copy from the NSA.
Yeah, let's pull forward. Talk about it.
Pull it up.
So that, yeah. Right.
And then down.
Yeah.
And then unwrap.
And then
There you go.
It's like the Donahue show.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we have a lot of dichotomies. It's very, very interesting. Provoked exactly the kind of... Oh.
Here's a handheld.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. So, does anyone have questions that they'd like to ask?
If you do, please wait for the microphone.
Good answer.
Okay.
No questions.
This is more of an observation, and it's really to the grad student. I think one reason that universities feel that they can ask, that dissertations and theses be deposited, and one reason that universities want that and consider it high value intellectual property is because a lot of work goes into them that's very collaborative. Advisors put a lot of time into reviewing and editing. You have to defend it before, your advisory group. So it is felt to some extent that it is the intellectual property of the university in producing the graduate student, even though it is fully recognized as the creative work of the graduate student. Does that make sense to you at all?
I think that how collaborative a dissertation is really depends on the individual product. I think some of them are very collaborative, and I think some of them are not, and I think it can vary by discipline as well. If it was an intellectual property right issue, like around, this work was done at this university, then why wouldn't the same thing be required of all faculty book manuscripts?
Actually, in a lot of, you actually will see differing things in university copyright policies. Our copyright policy at the university actually states that the university releases all claim to faculty research because they could actually make a point that some of this could be considered a work made for hire, since faculty are using, and students as well, are using resources paid for by the university, usually using, time spent at the university, maybe in the case of a faculty, time while they're, being paid as part of their employment. So some universities do actually say that they retain some copyright in the faculty members' research, but that they are giving them non-exclusive license to make use of it. That is actually part of the rationale behind open access policies that universities like Rutgers has now adopted, are taking, saying that the faculty, in fact, will be asked to deposit, their papers in the university's institutional repository. So there is actually that sense that this is, there is some level of collaborative ownership there.
I think something that also comes into play with dissertations is it is a sense of public document. It's a demonstration that you have become a scholar, a member of the community of scholars. And the normal procedure was you deposited it in the library in paper copy, and you can go into Alexander, and we have probably thousands of volumes of dissertations. And so they were accessible, of course not in the enhanced way that the PDF would be.
One of the issues that Ashley was the first person to bring up, our last speaker, was the issue of academic integrity. And I think that this is a proper issue that universities must consider in the context of open access. I personally don't think that it's something that most universities address as rigorously as they should. I will observe that one of the differences between basing a paper, for example, on a print work versus using something that's available full text online, like the dissertations in RU ETD and RU Core, is that Turnitin will discover text taken from a dissertation online, but it won't discover text taken from a print-only dissertation. But I think that the academic integrity issue has to also be addressed. I don't think it's, as Ashley said, it's not merely a, how many $20 royalty checks can I get? It really goes much deeper than that.
I just had a question as somebody, so I completed my dissertation through Rutgers, so I know that it's up on RU Core and trying to, figure that out in the publication process, or what needs to be done. I had one question and then a comment. The comment was sort of about agreeing with Ash's discussion about, I had no idea when we finished, there's really nothing, and I would say just at least at Rutgers, but I think this is elsewhere too, there's very little knowledge about what that form is and what you are filling out and what you are giving away. I was lucky to sort of ask advisors who also were unsure about what that form was and what I needed to do, especially with the new sort of electronic access to things. So I do think that there is just a resource and information issue for graduate students, and things like this are helpful, but to get out to more students about what that means, what the embargo means. I know I was encouraged to embargo it, but that was upon asking people. And since then, have been the go-to person for other graduate students to come to me to ask what to do. Not that I'm that much more knowledgeable, but because there's no other, they didn't know where to go. So that was just sort of an observation in agreement that there's a lot of, while there might be people debating, is there a lot of students that just don't even think about it because they're too worried to try and get the dissertation done. And then the question for the repositories, if you embargo it, does the repository keep an abstract up? Because I think there's some sort of a compromise there, and sort of, you can still have your information and some sort of sense of what your research is, so folks can contact you or whatever to get more information. Or if it's embargoed, it's completely off. I just wasn't sure what the policy was.
I can actually answer that question. Thank you.
I figured.
Yeah, you're right. There are some things that are not embargoed. The author's name, the names of the committee members, the title and the abstract, keywords, subject headings, the name of your graduate school, your graduate program, those things are not embargoed. In fact, the only thing that is embargoed is the actual PDF full text of the dissertation.
So that's
So
helpful in the
in-
marketing piece, like when students say, we still want our work to be out there to sort of let people know what we're doing, but you don't give away the full dissertation.
I also want to mention that some of the graduate schools actually offer dissertation workshops. Graduate School New Brunswick offers about 10 of them a year. And graduate students are encouraged, at least by the graduate school, to attend one of those. And all of these details that you need are explained to you. And it is very appropriate to attend them before you're finished writing the dissertation.
Can I just jump in here as an outsider to that whole process? But just to got into this, hearing from graduate students and not just tonight, but talking to a few at Temple who work at the press and some others I know, the amount of non-information about this, and also from the response here, the amount of non-information is actually staggering. And I think that's true through all of this, where so we're creating these institutional repositories. At some universities, we're creating mandates, and I take it from what was said here that there's now a quote mandate, although it's a funny use of the word, for faculty to deposit their research into an institutional repository. But for faculty, it's really, all the faculty in most places has to do, and you could tell me if Rutgers is different, but in most places, I know it's true at Harvard, faculty writes a letter and says, no, my publisher doesn't want me to be covered by having to click by this mandate. And then they were said, oh, okay, then you're not covered by this mandate. And I don't think graduate students, and Ashley referred to herself as lowly, which is the last thing that a graduate student should refer themselves as, but that, I understand how they get to feel that way. I suspect that this comes at the end of a very long process. Graduate students have 8 million things to think about, and it's great, and I'm not saying that anybody's doing anything wrong. It's great to hold some workshops, but I would bet that the faculty is almost or maybe even more ignorant than the grad students about all of this. And so they go to their advisors, and their advisors go, I don't know. And I think there's a real problem in that we all need to, Peter and I, we go around and we do work. We all do work. Every university press person does workshops on how to revise your dissertation, stuff like that. And it is still true that the level of ignorance about that part of the process, about the whole publishing and the whole dissemination process, is staggering, because it's overwhelming just to have to do the research and learn the material and master the field and write something. So anyway.
Maybe just one other comment from me. Remember that most dissertations do not get published. Many books are published and are never borrowed from libraries and scarcely read. So, I mean, there is, again, I perfectly understand the concern of graduate students, but the countervailing thing is you want people to read your ideas at some point. You want people to encounter them, to absorb them in some way. And I think it's just, we need a balance here between protecting the rights and the careers of authors, but also recognizing very few dissertations do get published, especially in their original form, and an awful lot just disappear. And that's sad in a lot of ways, given how many years people spend writing them.
I just had a comment to follow up with what Kevin's saying. There's a lot of people that are interested in open access. A lot of people are not. Many people aren't. Many graduate students are interested in open access. We have a lot of graduate students that contact us that are interested in open access. I have a question for ProQuest about how many people are purchasing the open access option that ProQuest has. Do you have a lot of uptake on your open access? I think it's about $165 extra to make your dissertation open access through ProQuest. Do you have much uptake on that?
Yeah, we've had a fair uptake on that option. It's not universally offered by all of our publishing partners, but we have thousands of dissertations that are made really widely available through
Because I
that.
think that goes to show that people are willing to pay extra for open access in the case of you, and also really appreciate the indexing that you do for all the disciplines. But there is a desire by many people to have their dissertations open access and they'll pay for it, so that's kind of glad to hear.
Can I raise a question in response to that, though? So you're touching on something that gets really interesting when you start getting into the dichotomy between the sciences and the humanities and social sciences. In the sciences, if there are fees involved in making a material available open access, most of the time it's pretty easy to find that money. A lot of times it comes from grants, it comes from other places. I wonder, what about the student for whom $165 is a lot of money? Who's going to pay that fee? And then what kind of situation are we creating if somebody really wants to something available open access as a dissertation and they don't have the money to pay for it? It's kind of to the side of what tonight's all about, but it really raises an interesting issue about that.
Well, I think there's other charges for humanities.
No,
Yeah.
please speak into the phone. She's still talking. Give her time.
I was just saying, I think there's other costs too for people in humanities, different kinds of costs, permissions and different things. I mean, I think the 160, my only comment was about that there are people willing to, I often hear that no one would pay ProQuest to make that open access option, and there are students doing it, so yeah.
And I think that issue of choice is what I'm most
You're
concerned
not
with.
talking into the mic, I'm sorry. We are taking.
Okay. Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
This issue of choice is what I'm most interested in. And because I feel like a lot of times this conversation comes down to like complete open access or complete embargo. And I think that most people want something in between. And right now there's not, especially at Rutgers, there's really no choices in between. And I think a lot more people would like to find this kind of balance, that you were talking about earlier, trying to find something in the middle.
I think that's a really valuable point, and as, the person with ultimate oversight for RU Core, I can say this is something, that we are looking at in other arenas, and is something that, I don't know how quickly it would move onto our development agenda, but something we can consider. We can, consider an option between embargo and open access, which would be, net ID authentication, which would mean limited to the Rutgers community. Whether we would consider that really depends on our graduate schools. Truthfully, this is a collaborative project. Rhonda meets regularly with the graduate schools, and most policy decisions, frankly, are developed by the graduate school.
All policy decisions.
Well, I wouldn't say all. There are some policy decisions specific to RU Core about how we handle versions and things like that, corrections, but most policy decisions are done by the graduate school. So I would say that that's a conversation that I encourage students to start with your graduate schools, and then, it's certainly something that Rhonda can discuss with the graduate schools when she meets with them. There isn't really a technical barrier, but there may be a policy barrier, and that's really something the graduate schools need to explore.
This is a question. This is a question from the online student. He says that you might be the best person to ask, but anyone on the panel can answer. Do journal publishers have issues with publishing journal articles that are derived from chapters in a thesis or a dissertation?
Yeah, I would say that is pretty similar to the issues with the book. The book chapters and articles are developed for a different audience than is a dissertation. So it's kind of a similar animal to what we've been talking about already. But I'll yield to my university press colleagues who probably have better insight about that.
Well, Rutgers Press does not publish journals, so I can't speak directly to that, but I think Ashley alluded to the fact that Science, which is as Kyle pointed out, it's a Chicago Press journal, has these particular policies. I'll stop there.
One thing
I'll add one thing that's very closely related, and Peter, I don't know how you feel, but there's also the issue of how many chapters from a dissertation / eventually revised dissertation get published as a journal article before a publisher who you would approach it to publish the book says, sorry, but you kind of gave away the whole game in journal articles. There's no value to the book anymore. You know, we have sort of loose rules about that, and I think it's a kind of judgment call based on the particular manuscript in question.
I think I have a slightly different take on that. One is that it's probably a good sequence to try to publish chapters of your dissertation as articles while you're going through the process. It'll make you a lot stronger on the job market. And secondly, I've seen a lot of scholarly books, and if you look at the acknowledgments, they'll note that, you know, chapters of this were published in such and such a journal or such and such a journal. Maybe not every chapter, but I think there is, and maybe these are more established scholars who can get away with it, but I think there is some sense in the humanities that the journal article is where you try out things, or maybe the conference paper, then the journal article, and then you ultimately build towards the book. But I would look at that sequence of publishing chapters or variants of your chapters as articles while you're going through the process. I think, again, it would make you much stronger on the job market.
Tying back to what the, I don't know if you've already finished or not, so student / alumni said earlier, is that there's all this anxiety with the job market and trying to figure out these publishing issues. And so while that sounds great to publish articles as we go along, because there is pressure to publish articles, now what we're hearing is that you need to publish articles on side projects that are not going to end up in the book, because you don't want to do anything to scare off publishers from your book, because that's like the path to tenure. And so, I mean, that it's just publishing pressures on top of publishing pressures, decreasing job market. It's frightening.
One thing that probably needs to happen is a discussion in faculties about changing our model for tenure and being a little bit more flexible about it. And that's something that I hope our newly graduating scholars will do when they get into departments. We don't have to do things the way we've always done them, especially when it seems like the model is getting a bit ossified.
True, but if you're a graduate student going into the market the way it is now, you're a graduate student going into the market the way it is now. I would say, you know, and take this for what it's worth, it's one person's opinion, and you may have your own. I think certainly one article from what is eventually going to become a book, that's almost like good marketing. That's like, you know, give people a taste and you know, and then they'll want to read the whole book. 2 might be, okay, that's still good. But by 3 is when I start to have some real, okay, how much, you know, what's going to be left to be in the book that's new.
So, Alex, you closed your remarks by saying that libraries and publishers need to work together. I was wondering if anyone on the panel, or if any of the librarians in the room, would maybe like to talk about, like, what would that mean specifically? What is it that people would like to see happen differently? Because if it is an issue, clearly there are changes that people would like to see made. So I was just wondering if anyone had any actually specific ideas about what that meant.
I'll start if you want. Okay. Well, one thing to bear in mind is that an increasing number of university presses actually report to the library. I do. I report to the dean of the libraries, and we are beginning to work a whole lot more closely on a whole lot of things, and this should certainly be one of them. And it really strikes me, you know, as somebody who sort of didn't find it that burning to begin with, but is impressed with the passion that I've seen in it, that they're really, you know, in my mind, and I think, you know, the author is the person who ultimately has the right, should have the right to be the one dictating what can and can't be put in the institutional repository. to start with. But assuming they say, okay, I want my whole dissertation in there, then agreeing that you take it out for a period while you're trying to sell a book, which is a different thing, but is based on that dissertation. If that will help in the overall structure of the university scholarly communications ecosystem, as Peter referred to it, so that the money is circulating in a way that actually is productive, then we should sit down and figure out, how to do that. It can go off into a whole lot of other complicated, related issues that have to do with things like people who institutions that free ride the whole scholarly communication system. But I'm not even going to go there. But I think the first thing is to sit down and talk about it and say, okay, if we agree, and I'm 99.9% sure that we do, that every librarian I know and every university press person I know would agree that what we want to do is disseminate scholarship as broadly as we can, and next to that, disseminate the highest quality scholarship we possibly can. If we agree on that, then surely there's a way to say, okay, when the dissertation comes out, then for that particular piece of research, that's the best form of that research. Let's let people see it, but that when it is subsequently revised for, as you said, a different audience, not, the primary audience for the dissertation is without doubt the committee. And in the dissertation, you have to show off all the things you know besides the specific research. You have to show that you know the whole field. In the book, you're addressing peers, and you may be addressing students. And so different audience, different words, different organization, perhaps some additional research, smoothing out of arguments, better writing, all kinds of stuff. When that comes along, then that should replace the dissertation, except for people who have some very specific reason to look at the dissertation, and they may. But the idea of, and I wouldn't even call it an embargo, I'd say replacing it. And if we wanted it to be, and if we wanted the book to be open access, we can go down that road. We just have to talk about where the money comes from to cover the cost of doing that. I don't know any publisher who's against open access. What we're saying is, okay, but how do I pay my costs? Because the university says they want me to recover 80% of my costs. I think open access is great. I'm a consumer too. But if I can't cover my costs, if we can't find a way to cover the costs, then open access doesn't work for me. So that's the basis for a conversation.
In RUCOR, we have actually on a couple of occasions put a note in the metadata that explains that this dissertation has been substantially revised and updated, and that the resulting work is reflected in this published volume available at this ISBN. And of course, the dissertation is under embargo because it is the book is about to be published. So while the dissertation might not be available, the searcher is directed to the published work, and in the future, when the embargo expires, both of them will be available, but the note will still point to the later published work.
Just a further question about like this monetizing, scholarly works. Do you think that the existing copyright is even valid as far as how long it would take you to fully recoup your expense? Do you think it would take 17 years, or do you think 5 years and you're not going to see any further sales? Is that something that you guys have pushed for? To have something open access after X amount of time, even if it didn't necessarily comply with the international copyright stance?
Well, you're sort of conflating two different things. So copyright is one thing, and copyright generally belongs to the author, unless the author explicitly transfers that copyright. Publishing, it is mixed. At some university presses, the copyright does get transferred. I actually think that's a mistake. I think if I were advising any student who was going to a press, I'd say try your hardest to keep the copyright in your name and to make the contract is a license to publish and to disseminate. Then the question of, do I sort of have the reader pays model for X number of years so that I can recover those costs, followed by open access. But that's how JSTOR got started, if you know what JSTOR is. I mean, but on the article level in journals, so they had a kind of rolling wall where, say, 5 years. The journal actually got to set it, but it might be 3 years in some fields, 5 years in another. And the same, I would say, with humanities, social sciences. The issue in humanities, social sciences is that the material ages much more slowly than scientific material ages. So I don't have an exact answer. And sometimes you could say, okay, if this is how much the book cost us, we're gonna gate it until we recover that much money plus, you know, some operating costs, and then we'll make it open access. I mean, you know, but on the other hand, there are books we publish, and I'm sorry that I keep going on long, but this gets very complicated. The best-selling book in the history of Temple University Press, I love to tell this story, is a revised dissertation. It is called Cheap Amusements, and it's about women in leisure time in late 19th century New York. It's by Kathy Pice, who's on the faculty at Penn, and we accepted it as a revised dissertation. It's a really good piece of work. And nobody, I wasn't at the press at the time, but I guarantee you, nobody predicted that this would be a work that would sell over 50,000 copies. But it did, because it turned out to be absolutely perfect in introductory women's studies courses at a time in the late 80s and early 90s where there wasn't much material around on this. That revenue wound up essentially underwriting a whole bunch of books that never make back their costs. Because the other problem we have is a significant percentage, and I think you probably confirm this is true at Rutgers too, a significant percentage of the books we publish never make back their costs. So if we use that as a thing, it might never become open access. So, but there has to be a solution.
I just want to make a couple of quick comments. One is that, you know, there are a lot of copyright issues that have yet to be resolved with dissertations. For one, you don't really see a lot of discussion of this, but it's actually kind of a critical issue. Is the dissertation a distinct work from a book, if a book is written that is a revision of the dissertation? You know, that's something that I personally believe they are two separately copyrighted works. I suspect that a lot of publishers would argue otherwise. So I think that that's an issue that really hasn't been explored very much and really needs to be addressed. The other is, because then the two are really not the same. You know, you can't really conflate, do we make the dissertation openly available in X number of years, you know, versus do we make the book available. The other is, I just want to add to Rhonda's point, I mean, we do believe very strongly in RU Core. We built it to be a relationship-friendly repository. We actually, we actually have a tool that analyzes videos, and we actually have video analytics, which are published in RU Core, also embedded in dissertations, and we link between the two. But we can only build these relationships if we know about them, so I do encourage, graduate students becoming faculty who are writing books to let us know that you want an embargo because you're expecting to publish a book, and then let us know when the book is published, because you know, we can retain that embargo but also link to that book. And I will tell you honestly, people are more likely to find your dissertation than they are to find that book. We can actually back that up, because it was a real surprise to me when I did my annual report this year to discover that our open access articles are getting way more downloads than the commercial articles for which we pay millions of dollars. And the reason is because they're openly available and they're readily discovered via Google Scholar. So the likelihood is that RU Core is going to be the gateway to people finding and buying your book.
This question actually is for Ashley, and any other PhD student in the audience. That is there a point at which, when you're first working on a dissertation and you are preparing that for defense, and the emotionality and the involvement is focused on that area, I would imagine. But then you produce this dissertation, And at some point, it's a separate entity from what has preceded it? And then it evolves again if you decide to publish something else? And how does that affect how you approach all these issues?
I think that's probably a better question asked to someone who's tenured and is working on their second project and has their book already. I mean, they'll probably talk about the project as having many stages. Just already, I think of my dissertation having many stages. The way I was talking about it 2 years ago is really different than the way I'm talking about it now. And by the time it's a book, and 2 years from now, or 4 years from now, or however long it takes, I'm sure I will talk about it very differently then. So I do think that the longer we work on work, it kind of seems to become a different kind of animal to us. But at the same time, there's parts of it that, you know, remain cohesive. So when I think about my project, I think about the way I narrate the questions that motivate my work now are different than I would have narrated them several years ago. But when I think about my work, I think about the questions I was asking when I first started my project. You know, that's where my heart was when I first started asking those questions. But
yeah, but there's the research component in asking the questions and answers, and then there's the object being the dissertation.
yeah, like I said, I think I'm still in it. So
Okay.
I don't have those reflections on the past yet.
Okay.
So I work in the libraries, and I'm also a graduate student. I'm not in a PhD program, but still relevant. And I think everyone here is worried about diminishing returns. As far as graduate students worrying about potential jobs, libraries worrying about their budgets, and publishers worrying about sales and diminishing returns as well. So I guess I'm just wondering, you know, what you guys think of, you know, is it even possible for us to come together and, you know, really make these key decisions? Are we incentivized enough, or are we fragmented as is, you know, in our own departments trying to make, you know, our own industry or you know, infrastructure work more efficiently? You know, how do you think that we can enable these kind of dialogues between the three realms?
Well, I mean, I was just, this is sort of a good follow-up to, I think, your question a little bit of how these discussions happening. Just anecdotally, I can report that I sit on a committee as part of the Association of American University Press, is the other AAUP, as we call it, and Alex alluded to before, and the committee is called the Library Relations Committee. And so there are institutional structures, at least, sort of springing up to foster this kind of interaction that, as all of you, I think, realize and have said in one form or another, need to happen. So there's informal collaboration. Sometimes groups of us go out to lunch. The longer I've been an editor at University Press, the more I've been curious and interested about the relationship between what we do and producing a product that our university colleagues, in this case literally down the road, are purchasing, right? So we're all part of the same university, the same institutional roof, and yet we have these different dynamics forcing our hands, so to speak. And so it's interesting. And so we don't, Rutgers Press and the director does not report to the university librarian here, Marion Gunn. But as Alex said, other universities it does. So the relationships, and anyhow, one of the things, the key things that I'll stop, is that this committee, the AAUP committee that I serve on, the Library Relations Committee, started to do was to take a survey, and surveyed university press directors, and surveyed research librarians or directors, senior level administrators. And that's in an effort, I think, to also get at something that is also identified here, people have put their finger on, and that is there's just a dearth of evidence. And so we really need to get a sense of how libraries and university press publishers are interacting, can interact, what joint products are possible within the context of shrinking budgets, changing priorities, increased and new technologies, and what libraries themselves are starting to do, including in some instances publishing other sorts of things that university press publishers can't.
And I would just add that I think the current model is simply collapsing, and that can be a disaster. It might be an opportunity if we're able to take it, but I don't think we can sustain the model we're in right now. All of the trends are terrible. Alex was talking about the likelihood of 25% of university press publishers being gone. I can see colleges and universities closing because the costs are unsustainable. Libraries not buying books because we don't have the money. So I don't think it's sustainable, and that maybe forces us to take other opportunities.
Yeah, I'll just give an example of one that it is in just an utterly nascent stage, but it's certainly a conversation worth having. And that is university presses working collaboratively among themselves and then engaging librarians in ways that have yet to be defined in beginning to publish STM journals. Historically, for reasons that I've never heard an explanation of that makes any sense to me, other than the fact that most people at university presses are humanities and social science people who like humanities and social sciences. University presses stopped publishing in the sciences for the most part. There are exceptions, Cambridge, Oxford, Chicago, but for the most university presses don't publish science. They just don't. Rutgers does now. And most of the money, I think most people in the room know, but some may not, most of the money in the scholarly communication system goes to STM publishing and the cost of buying STM publishing. You can get into all kinds of reasons why, because university presses haven't done it. Commercial presses have. Commercial presses are profit driven. It's just a fact of life. Whereas libraries and university presses are all devoted to the same thing, which is disseminating research. So next week, a group of us, including Rutgers and Temple, are going to the Coalition for Network Information to present the kind of ideas we've been bubbling among ourselves about how we can undertake STM journal publishing, and how we can do that without it becoming just another add-on cost for libraries to support. Oh, great, more journals for us to buy, even if they're cheaper than the ones that we're buying from elsewhere. But how we could actually work together and engage faculty and make it a university-wide, across multi-university way of breaking out of silence. It's just one example. I have no idea if it'll work, but it's one example.
Oh, this is a simple question. First of all, I'd like to thank you, the panelists. It's been very inspirational and a lot of new ideas emerging. So in the context of changing the ecosystem, Peter, that you referred to, I was wondering if we could, for example, you mentioned that there is this library committee, outreach committee in the AAUP, and whether as an effort to reimagine relationships and maybe brainstorm new ideas, whether this kind of committee could have a liaison librarian to participate and perhaps would actually help bridge ideas, common purposes, and maybe it would actually deepen the kind of conversation that we have towards a solution in the future.
There are actually librarians and people with direct reporting and institutional connections on that Library Relations Committee. It's called the AAUP. So some of my co-committee members are employed by libraries. And so absolutely. But and again, that committee, as Alex says, takes a bit of a roadshow, goes to the Charleston conference, right? Goes to ALA perhaps, and then we also have report in our own AAUP convention in June. So there's a lot of opportunity for that dialogue.
I just had two other quick observations about collaboration. I was a little struck to see your new offices kind of above Barnes & Noble, and I had gone to a panel once with the National Association of College Stores and University Presses and Libraries, and it sort of strikes me that there's there's more to the ecosystem, and now you're like on top of the college store, and so that was very interesting to me.
Only in terms of architecture.
Right. But But the other thing I just wanted to mention, something that we hear on the open access side, is humanities. A lot of humanities people want to make sure that humanities is visible in the academy and to the outside world too, and not really. I can imagine whole departments now sometimes hearing this and all embargoing their dissertations all for 6 years because they're all worried. And I think a lot of people, as departments are closing and universities are putting all their attention to engineering and business and all this other stuff, there's got to be kind of a rising up of the humanities and social sciences where people can actually know what's going on in, say, a classics department or something, because this idea of just hiding it kind of, I think, and as you mentioned, technology just is running away. Like you can't, this idea that maybe you'd like to go back and just put the dissertation on the shelf in the library is something sort of the horses out of the barn. And humanities really does need to be, surfaced along with, business and everything else, because departments are shrinking and closing, and you just want to make sure that new people coming along, young people, everybody gets excited about humanities, and how are they going to do that? So.
Are there any other questions, comments? If not, I want to thank everybody.
Please use the microphone.
Will do. Well, I want to thank everybody on the panel and everyone that attended. This has really been wonderful, very good discussion, a lot of ideas. I don't know where we're going with them, but it's an opening, actually. It is very good. And thank you all for listening.